Hello everyone, this is my review on The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly, and this book was a direct recommendation from Misty the Book Rat, her top 10 fairy tale retellings video. I believe this was number 9, I think, and I'll link those videos in the doobly-doo in my pants. This was mentioned during her fairy tale fortnight that she had last month, was it? Might have been the month before, anywho. And because I'm a huge fairy tale lover, I thought, ooh, that sounds very interesting, and her description of it was intriguing as well, because it's, I think Misty said it's technically an adult book, even though this cover would be quite deceptive. Although I think it's an effective cover, it might still give people the wrong idea, which again is a lesson to not judge a book by its cover. And it does have a 12-year-old protagonist, so the notion of it being presented as a middle grade novel makes sense, or indeed maybe a young adult book. I don't really know what the demographic, intended demographic would be for this novel, just because it is quite dark and very violent at times, a lot of the time, which was incredibly effective and it worked really well. I just don't, like Misty said, you probably wouldn't want your 12-year-old, a 12-year-old reading it, and I'd agree. Like, a teenager, yes. It's difficult because the tone of it is, again, very effective in that it takes the sort of typical voice and style and structure that fairy tales do, in that it's not too, the language and the imagery and things aren't too complex, they're rather straightforward and direct, and so I guess stylistically it isn't above, a 12-year-old's comprehension, but the themes and the subject matter and some of the stuff that occurs within it certainly would, it doesn't make for pleasant reading even. For me, I was quite uncomfortable and disgusted by stuff at times, so yeah, just in terms of marketing, I don't know who would be best to read this book, but I certainly recommend it because it's very, very interesting, and I was emotionally engaged the entire time. It follows a lad named David, and he is a great reader of books in general, but fairy tales, and things happen. The book takes place during the middle, I think, beginning middle of World War II, and David lives in England with his dad, and his mother has just passed away, and then things happen with his father, and he gets remarried rather quickly because he's been hooking up with this other lady named Rose, and she's pregnant, and so they have this other child, and of course David, 12-year-old David, feels very displaced and ignored and frustrated and angry and things, and so this of course is the perfect setup for stuff to happen, and him to get thrust into this other world of fairy tale storybook influences where a lot of bad things go down and he has a lot of lessons to learn. And what was very groovy about the book is that it incorporates many, many fairy tales and many characters and stock figures that we recognise and twist them around a lot. You'll meet Snow White in here, but she's not Snow White as you know her at all. And that was, the book is, like I said, it's very dark, and the tone of it is quite, I wouldn't say heavy, but it's almost at times unrelentingly grim. There are very few places in the novel where it's happy and there's a positive air about things, and you feel like you can relax a little bit and finally smile. So the Snow White section was one of the few times I think where I was actually having a bit of a chuckle and smiling a little. So that was a huge relief, and it also just featured some really clever, ridiculous moments, because the dwarves in who live with Snow White are like socialists trying to bring about a workers' reform because they work in the mine and they don't feel they get enough credit and whatnot. So that was quite amusing. I'll try and find the line that described. Here we go. This is what after David says goodbye to Snow White and the dwarves, and he's on his way. He had quite liked the dwarves. He often had no idea what they were talking about, but for a group of homicidal class-obsessed small people, they really were quite good fun. I thought that line was a doozy, because they I won't give away what the homicidal thing means. So yeah, a lot of characters and stories we know are very much twisted. There's like direct storytelling within the book. Different characters tell stories to David during the course of his travels, and they again are fairy tales we know, but they're twisted around. There's also the main antagonist in the book, who is the Crooked Man. It's hinted right from the beginning, but it's revealed towards the end that he's a fairy tale figure we know very well as well. And he is one heck of an antagonist. One of those people who, it's not that they're evil for evil's sake, but one of the few times you can indulge in a bad character who is just unrelentingly bad, and there's no real backstory as to why he behaves the way he does, but the deeds he carries out and the things he takes pleasure in are truly disgusting and sadistic and awful. That's another thing, like there's a lot of, because the tone of the writing in that is so direct and kind of just in your face, and there's no nonsense about it, there's a lot of violence that goes on, there's a lot of battles, a lot of death. You know that almost everyone you meet in the course of the story while David's journeying through this land, you know that almost everyone you meet is going to die, and going to die in a horrific way. No one is afforded the luxury of a easy, painless, really swift death, sadly, so you have to witness an awful lot of bloodshed and whatnot. And there's, yeah, the details surrounding the Crooked Man and what he gets up to, they're revealed towards the end of the book, and there's some really horrible things that go on there. Yeah, also there's themes that some are lightly touched upon and some are given a bit more weight, but the writing style is very clever, because the way that these social and themes of human nature and the darker side of human nature and things, the way they're touched upon in the writing is very effective, because it's brought up subtly, and it's difficult to explain it, but it's very much in the same manner in which you would sense things were being spoken about in fairy tales when you'd read them, like the original stuff by the Brothers Grimm or Charles Perrault or whatnot. When you'd read that stuff and you think, oh, I think maybe he's talking about this here, but it's never, you know, directly mentioned. And there's topics of pedophilia and rape, murder. Well, murder's featured directly, but yeah, murder of children and women and adulterous affairs. I'm trying to think what else there is. Yeah, there's some graphic, very adult things that come about in the course of the story. But it all feels fitting. Like I don't know how many people perceive fairy tales and their nature, and like how, you know, each person's individual perception of fairy tales would stand now, like whether or not you are more familiar with sanitized Disney versions of things. But for me, I felt at all times, no matter how grim and how dark and depressing the tone became, and no matter what topics were brought into the story, I always felt that it was serving the material and that it worked and made sense to me, at least in how I view fairy tales. I also thought it was also just a very, especially toward the first few chapters of the novel, a really beautiful reflection on the nature of storytelling and narrative, and how that can shape us as people, and how important it can be, and how much it can feed a person's soul, especially someone who's introverted and kind of a loner and that sort of thing, like David is in the story, and how special reading, the act of reading and others reading to him and him sharing an experience, and then him, like, it being a solo activity, how important that can be for a child especially. And I thought that was really beautiful. There were some passages towards the beginning of the book that were just lovely, and there's also just this awesome concept that the books like speak to David. He can hear them speaking to him from the shelves, and the idea of like abandoned books that had been forgotten or hadn't been read in a very long time, or were scholastic texts perhaps that didn't need to get picked up more than once, how they'd become disgruntled and angry and grumpy and would be like whinging and muttering on the shelves because they weren't looked at anymore and things. I thought that was a really clever, really cool idea. There was a lot of ambiguity about things as well, like it's never completely outlined what exactly happened to David to bring him into the world and to bring him into this fantasy world that he enters, and the nature of his condition that's sort of hinted at towards the beginning of the book is never really highlighted. But I think that the somewhat loose ends that remain are still, I don't know, it just felt like the right thing to do. I felt that if things had been too solidified come the end of the book and everything had been revealed, I might have felt a little cheated, just because I preferred to kind of come to my own conclusions about what might have happened and things. But I mean, that's just me. In some ways it could be frustrating for people to not know, but they were very minor details really overall. Also, I should say that the end of the book, while we do have a happy conclusion, it's very bittersweet, and the kind of unrelenting, I don't want to say grimness again, but it's sort of just very truthful, and nothing gets painted, glossed over, or made to seem better than it's going to be. It's just a very honest look at life and how most people's lives pan out and things. So I should warn you that the ending isn't nearly as happy as I think a lot of people would like. But it's very truthful and still very, very moving because of that. And yeah, I really came to care for, like, David, because he's 12, and this is the other thing, it's quite a familiar situation that he's in, because you know the sort of mistakes he's going to have to make along the way, and you can recognize the internal struggles and the errors that he will have within himself that he has to overcome in order to succeed and to conquer and come out at the end, because you know how fairy tales pan out and it's all very recognizable. It's like if you've watched Pan's Labyrinth, the Spanish film, you know the kind of mistakes the girl will make in that film, because she has to make them in order for the story to work as a fairy tale. So it is a little frustrating at times, but then I guess you have to remember David is 12, and the mistakes he makes are in nature of driving the plot forward, and yet they're still understandable for who he is and for his age as well. Yeah, and there's some side characters that are really, like, beautiful. Again, they're all there very fleetingly, I should warn you, because almost everybody dies. So try not, it was hard for me too, but try not to get too attached maybe to the side characters you meet along the way, because just a warning, this isn't a spoiler, but most of them are not going to stay around for very long, because there's a lot of death in this book, so just a heads up. But if you like fairy tales, if you like just well-told, well-structured, very classic plots, and you like fantasy, and you don't mind a little bit of violence, I certainly do recommend this book, and it was a really interesting read, and I really did enjoy the experience, despite how upset I was for most of the reading of it. So I do give it a 5 stars out of 5 stars, and thank you very much to Misty at the Book Rat for recommending this, and yeah, everybody pick it up if you can. It's The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly.